We're all human, and it's important to know that doctors are people too. Doctors have emotions, they have passions in life and hobbies, and they enjoy participating as active members in the communities where they practice medicine. Doctors have families, friends, and relationships, while the latest in healthcare and the most current treatments for ailments will be topics on this Doctors Are People Too radio TV show. The focus will be in learning more about the interesting aspects in a physician's life and what they do away from the doctor's office or operating room table.
Hello, South Florida, and welcome, South Florida and beyond. And on the iHeartRadio app and amp2.tv, welcome to Doctors Are People Too. We are so lucky to have an interventional neurologist on the program tonight, Dr. Ritesh Kaushal, who's going to share with us one of the more unique stories I've seen in South Florida in my existence. I got to say that I've never seen a media placement like this that we're going to get into right now. And before I say anything else, let's welcome Dr. Ritesh Kaushal. Dr. Kaushal, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on the program.
Thank you, Dr. Kaushal, and thank you for joining Doctors Are People Too, so we can, let South Florida know about not only the adventures in health and where we're going and the future of health, but also what doctors do outside of providing care. Dr. Kaushal, I got to tell you, when I saw this Miami Herald article that I'm referencing here, and I'm a reporter, a writer by trade, I had never seen a story quite like this. So let me just break this down for the listeners, and then I'll have you comment on it. So Dr. Kaushal is an interventional neurologist, and one of his main focuses is stroke and aneurysm treatment, and he's going to tell us a couple more things he treats that are a little more complicated, even for my brain. But Dr. Kaushal, do I have this right? You have a police siren in your car that helps you get to the hospital faster to treat trauma stroke victims. Is that correct?
Right. Yes. I mean, I have the police lights in my car. And it's not trauma stroke, but yes. I mean, the stroke patients per se. The city actually was very proactive in this. Miami-Dade, in fact, the whole Tri-County area, Broward and West Palm Beach, everyone's joining hands and trying to see how we can work and advance the stroke narrative and the stroke care. So one of those things, again, was the timely fashion, or how fast can the stroke victims or patients be treated. And within that, every minute was of paramount importance. I mean, one very important thing to remember is that in a stroke, we lose about 2 million brain cells every minute. So that becomes, that being the focus, everything kind of revolves around how fast we can get to the patient and how fast we can open his blood vessel. So that's what led to the whole idea of putting in lights so that I could reach the hospital at the earliest to try to somewhat reduce the impact of stroke on the patient.
And Dr. Kaushal, you're an interventional neurologist, and you're the director of the Comprehensive Stroke Center there at Palmetto General Hospital in Hialeah. So that's a very high-traffic area. Is that one of the reasons that you were a perfect candidate for this, I'm going to call it a pilot program, because I haven't seen it in South Florida?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, so the Hialeah EMS, more specifically Chief Anchia and Chief Flynn there, they recognized the importance of, again, treating the stroke patients as fast as possible. Now, within that, we tried to minimize every hurdles that we could find, which were time-consuming. Primarily among them being we streamlined the process in the emergency room. We streamlined the process towards getting a CT scan, and also towards identifying the stroke patients as early as possible. Now, the only thing which was left really was the impact of South Florida traffic. And unfortunately, you're very right in saying that 95, Palmetto Expressway, Dolphin, and 75. They can be they have pretty nightmarish traffic. My commute usually is about 15 minutes without traffic, but that could easily get down to about 45 minutes. And so that led to this whole thing where what we piloted really is the fact that traditionally what happens is that once the EMS gets to the emergency room, that's when they call the interventionalist. But what we piloted is that the EMS personnel, they call me directly from the patient's house of the patient who's having a stroke. So essentially, as they are driving to Palmetto General Hospital, at the same time, I also start driving there so that we basically almost reach together. And what we found in the beginning was that EMS always used to beat me in reaching the hospital. I mean, they were always faster than me. The whole question, of course, came down to the fact that, they had the emergency lights. And all of us being emergency medical service providers, we really thought that, let's see if putting lights in could help and reduce this time frame. And we see pretty successful results in that.
Dr. Ghoshal, you said it best. Time is brain. You said that early on, and I got to tell you, this is one of the most amazing stories I've ever seen. I think I've said that a couple times now, but I can't emphasize it enough. So, take us, if you will, a little bit into this. So, EMS fire rescue. I see in the picture here, Hialeah Fire Rescue. So they worked with you to install its red siren in your dashboard, and then it obviously was connected to their rescue computer network.
Right. So yes, I mean what we piloted off was that they put lights. I mean they've got the lights also in my headlights. They've got the strobe lights and the back lights as well. So the idea being, I still follow absolutely almost all the traffic rules and regulations. The only thing where I found there to be significant time saving was driving down the emergency lanes on a highway. So many a times what we found, in fact, the last case also that I had was surprisingly on a weekend, where you would not expect as bad a traffic. But 75 was under construction, 4 lanes were blocked off. There was only a single functional lane, and the traffic was stretched about 3 miles. Now, if I had to wait that whole time, I would have lost about half an hour. And I had a 65-year-old person with a stroke. So I actually used the emergency lanes and got to the hospital in about 14 minutes. And, I removed the clot from the person's head, and he made a very good recovery. He was, in fact, back to normal. He was paralyzed on the right side when he came in and could not speak, and he was back to normal the next day. So it's made a huge, huge difference.
Wow, that time has saved patients, definitely. And now you made a good point. You're using the emergency lane. This is more of a safety thing, kind of like when we see emergency vehicles behind us, we get out of the way. So this is more like that, more so than you just speeding to get to the hospital. It's more of to alert the traffic around you that you need to get through. And obviously they don't know who you are in most cases, but the way your car looks, it kind of looks like an undercover car. So I would get out of the way. Is that the point that I'm trying to make here?
Yeah. No, I mean, I have to say, in the beginning, I was a little skeptical, whether people would actually, given the fact that it's not a police car, would they actually move out of the way? But surprisingly, I've seen most of the people really do. I mean, they make an extra effort really to even try to give me a lane to pass by. So overall, yes. I mean, I've definitely have to say I've had very good experiences with all the drivers around. No one's really honked me. No one's really, shown me a finger or something. So no, absolutely, it's been a very good thing.
And Dr. Ghoshal, how many times have you used this already? And second part of the question, which you could probably answer first, is when did you start using this device to help save lives?
So we got this installed in my car about a month and a half ago. So early August was when this was placed, and so far I've used it about 5 times, and all 5 times, like I said, we've had very good outcomes in the patient population. Now this could be coincidental, but at the same time, we know that the early the intervention, the better the outcome. So I have to say that. On an average, I probably saved about 20 minutes on each one of those. So again, just equating that down to the brain, that's about close to about 80 million brain cells that potentially would have been lost, just by that delay. So I would say it's been pretty impactful in just the last 6 weeks or so.
And Dr. Kishal, I just want to give out your info there, and then I got a couple more questions. So we're here with Dr. Ritesh Kishal, interventional neurologist. He's director of the Comprehensive Stroke Center at Palmetto General Hospital. He's also an employed physician with Tenet Florida Physician Services and the Miami-Dade Neuroscience Institute. Dr. Kishal's office is located at 7100 West 20th Avenue, Suite 504 in Hialeah in Miami-Dade County. And his number is 305-823-8510. And one of the easiest website URLs, mdnineuro.com. That's mdnineuro.com. Dr. Kishal, you mentioned that in a few cases you've been able to actually get to the hospital quicker than the ambulance that's carrying the patient. As a physician and an interventional neurologist, that kind of how does that give you an advantage on getting ahead on the stroke call, being there a little earlier when in the past you were called in and came after the patient arrived?
Right. So, essentially, if we are there, which usually during the daytime I'm in the hospital, so if there is a stroke patient who comes in at that time, then everyone is prepared. We have the room ready, we have the nurses, the technicians, everyone all prepared to take in and bring in the patient at the earliest. Of course, there is some prep work that is needed for any operative procedures. So similarly, we also need to do that. And all this prep work now can be done when we are, since we are already there waiting for the patient. Now, of course, the biggest difference and the biggest impact that this makes is in the off hours. Someone having a stroke at night 1 o'clock, or someone having a stroke even in evening 7, let's say, or early morning at 6:30. So times essentially when the whole team is not in the hospital. Now, with this notification system by fire rescue, we all just dash to the hospital. So as soon as basically I'm there, I can start the machine up. I'm ready at the CT scan area for the patient. As soon as we get the CT scan of the brain, then we can immediately bring the patient on our table to remove the clot. So it really does help us have all the prep work done and be completely prepared and be ready as soon as the patient hits our door.
That's great news, Dr. Kishal. Hey, do you have time to come back on the other side of this quick commercial break, and we'll talk a little bit about your areas of interest for 10 minutes? I know you're on call, so I want to make sure.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'll be available. If I do get called, unfortunately, I'll have to leave, but for now, it's been good.
Definitely, Dr. Kishal. Take that call if you get called, but if not, let's talk about your areas of interest on the other side on Doctors Are People Too.
I make a dinner for me and my girlfriend. We ate, we enjoyed the dinner, was very good. She was ready to go to sleep. I said, okay, I'm gonna stay on the couch a little bit to watch TV. I started to feel something in my throat, like I was choking. And all of a sudden I feel the pain, the sharp pain, like somebody put a knife in your back and open and do like this. That was when I called my girlfriend. I said, you have to take me to the hospital. I couldn't die. When they were doing the test, they saw something was weird. My valve was ripped. I said, God, please help me to get out of this. Dr. Valle was on call. He was who performed my surgery. I describe like an angel. I describe like he was there to do that for me. My girlfriend, my son, he told me when they saw him getting out from the operation room, he was sweating. He was tired to be there for 10 hours. For me, it's unbelievable. I can walk, I can exercise a little bit, and I can drink red wine, that light red wine. Of course, 1 glass or 2 glasses. I see the life different. And I want to see my granddaughter to grow and my son to get old. So I wanna live. I think that God gave me one more chance in life, and I had to take advantage of this.
You are listening to Doctors Are People Too with David DiPino, who shows us the human side of medical doctors in the community. If you have a question for our guest, call into the show at 888-565-1470. Now, let's get back to the fun side of doctors and show that they are people too.
And we're back on Doctors Are People Too with Dr. Ritesh Kaushal. Dr. Kaushal, I didn't want to leave out. You're also on staff at Florida Medical Center, a campus in North Shore and Fort Lauderdale. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
Okay, so you are the director of the Comprehensive Stroke Center at Palmetto General Hospital, and then you also are called in for stroke cases at Florida Medical Center. I'm glad remembered to mention that because they're both of them great hospitals. Florida Medical Center is in Fort Lauderdale, and as we mentioned before, Palmetto General Hospital is in Hialeah. And Dr. Kaushal, thanks again for coming back. I know you're about the busiest guy I know, so I'm so glad you had a little bit of time to take with us. Talk about a little bit your areas of interest in aneurysm treatment. I don't think we hear as much as we do on strokes as aneurysm, but I know it's a very important part and something that, can affect a family, obviously the patient. So you talk us through a little bit what you do to treat aneurysms?
Sure enough. So essentially, stroke, there are two kinds of strokes. One is the ischemic stroke, which accounts for about 87% of all strokes, and then 13% of all strokes are what we call hemorrhagic strokes. So these are strokes that happen because of a bleed in the brain. So it's a hemorrhage that happens in the brain. Now, one of the most common causes of hemorrhagic stroke is a ruptured aneurysm. So an aneurysm would be this kind of a blister in one of the blood vessels in the brain, and that ruptures, and there's bleeding in the brain. Now, unfortunately, within the two groups, hemorrhagic strokes tend to have a much higher mortality rate. With aneurysmal ruptures, the mortality rate exceeds, unfortunately, 50%. And even the patients who live with significant amount of disability. So again, these are, if you will, the more serious kinds of strokes, so they have to be dealt with in a very different manner, so to speak. And so one of the first and most important thing is really fixing the aneurysm, which has ruptured, to prevent it from rupturing again, because that would be essentially fatal. So the way we do it nowadays is through intervention. I mean, traditionally, these aneurysms were repaired by open neurosurgical procedures. So you'd have to actually open the skull. But nowadays, we can actually do these endovascularly. So we just go in from one of the blood vessels in the leg and take a small catheter all the way up through the chest, through the neck, into the brain. And then we enter the aneurysm through the blood vessel, and then we plug up the aneurysm by a procedure called coiling. So that's now considered to be pretty much the standard for aneurysmal repair. But again, these are pretty sensitive procedures, so to speak, and need to be done in advanced neuroscience centers, essentially comprehensive stroke centers like Palmetto and like Florida Medical Center.
And Dr. Kaushal, I think when you say, you used to have to go through the skull to treat these, I kind of think that's a little bit archaic, but obviously the medicine has moved so far advanced what you and your team is doing, that you actually just explained to us you can go through the leg and either pull a clot out of the brain or treat a aneurysm, and I just think that's amazing. So if you could just also tell us a little bit more about that, because that makes it more minimally invasive. So does that mean less time in the hospital, less trauma to the brain if you're going through intravenously through the leg rather than through the skull?
Right. No, you're absolutely right in that. Any open procedures, of course, have a higher rate of morbidity. So you're right in saying that, especially a lot of these aneurysms, unfortunately, are very deep-seated in the brain. So even with open neurosurgical procedures where you'd have to actually open the skull, you'd still have to go through a fair amount of normal brain to even reach the aneurysm. So that essentially leads further to more morbidity and potentially more brain damage as well. So with endovascular therapy, because it's minimally invasive, really speaking, there's no imprint left. I mean, the only thing is like a 2 millimeter incision in the leg area. And so overall, the length of stay in the intensive care unit, the length of stay in the hospital is significantly reduced. And in fact, just the recovery is significantly improved. Most patients get back to almost completely normal functioning within 2 weeks after having a significant bleed in the brain. So for sure, yes, these procedures have made a big impact.
Now I left this for the last of your areas of interest. You also mentioned endovascular treatment of blood vessels in the neck and brain. I think you did a great job explaining that, and you can add a little bit more about the neck if you'd like. But I wanted to ask you about, and I'm going to mess this up, Dr. Kaushal, treatment of other arteriovenous malformations in the brain. What are those, and how are those treated?
Right. I mean, so another cause of having a bleed or a hemorrhage in the brain, one of the common causes, especially in the younger age group, is an arteriovenous malformation. So these are essentially malformed blood vessels where there is a direct connection between the artery and the vein. And what this causes is the arterial pressure being significantly higher than the venous pressure. At some point, these end up rupturing. So at one point, treating these malformations was extremely difficult, even with open neurosurgical procedures. But with endovascular therapy now, we can actually enter these malformed vessels, and we can individually select the vessels that we don't think are really functioning properly, in the sense that they're not really supplying the brain tissue, but essentially they're just malformed and end up causing bleeding. So we go up and we use a specific substance, like an embolic substance called onyx, and which essentially is like a super glue, if you will. And then we plug up these vessels so that they don't end up bleeding again. So another big area where endovascular therapy has shown huge promise has been arteriovenous malformations.
We're here with Dr. Ritesh Kaushal, interventional neurologist at the Miami-Dade Neuroscience Institute, and on staff as the director of the Comprehensive Stroke Center at Palmetto General Hospital, and also on staff at Florida Medical Center, a campus in North Shore in Fort Lauderdale. Dr. Kaushal's office is 7100 West 20th Avenue, Suite 504 in Hialeah, but you can call him in his office at 305-823-8510 and talk to his staff if you have any questions. You can also find Dr. Kaushal's info at mdnineuro.com. That's M like the Miami, D like the Dolphins, N is Neuroscience Institute, the I there, and neuro.com. Dr. Kaushal, I just have a couple questions. I promise I'm going to let you go. I keep doing that to you. But you had a very unique internship, residency, and fellowship internship and residency in Chicago and fellowship in the great city of St. Louis. Could you talk briefly about those experiences and then list the fellowships that you're trained in for the listeners?
Sure. I did my residency and my internship in Chicago at the University of Chicago. It was a very, very great program, a very academic program. I had excellent mentors up there. And then I followed that up. And I always had an interest towards the interventional aspect because this was a new field, really. Interventional neurology as a fellowship is only about 10 years old, really. So when I was in my training earlier on, it was a completely new field and really piqued my interest. So after completing my residency at the University of Chicago, then I moved down to St. Louis, and there I did my fellowship in interventional neurology and neurocritical care. So there also, St. Louis by itself is a pretty big city, but a good 200-mile radius around St. Louis, there really isn't much of a big city or a big program, if you will. So essentially what we had in St. Louis was slightly unique, that the patients would actually get flown from varying distances, all the way from 100 miles, 150 miles. They would be airlifted and they would come down to our university, and we would treat them. So it had a very huge catchment area, but at the same time, it also made us improve the whole transferring or stroke triage business as well. So, more specifically, because we keep talking about the hospitals, but one thing which is very important to remember again is that the stroke starts at a person's house, and getting to the hospital is a huge struggle as well. And that's where my partnership here with Hialeah Fire Rescue and Miami-Dade Fire Rescue has been extremely helpful, because what we found that some of those protocols, especially the air ambulance protocols in St. Louis, helped us quite a bit even down here, where really speaking, we have good resources, we have excellent hospitals, pretty close to each other, but again, just maintaining the blood pressure, controlling the vital signs, giving the medication, even en route to the hospital, having that conversation going with the physician, even when the patient has not hit the door, calling me. So at that point in St. Louis, I would be called by a small town like Pikesville or some other town which was about 100 miles away, and the ER there would call me, and I'd basically be directing care remotely from 100 miles away, saying that, okay, we got to do this, we got to do that, let's get the patient lifted now, and so on. And that same practice has been continuing here now when the fire rescue calls me from the patient's house. And at that point, we again decide the same thing. Let's start him on IV fluid. Let's keep his head flat. Let's try to keep the blood pressure high, stabilize the patient as best as we can. And then as soon as they reach our door, we're all prepared. So I think everything kind of works, and a lot of my training also did help me streamline this whole process in a much better sense.
Dr. Ghoshal, it sounds like you are a big-time team player, and that's great to hear, and I know you have an amazing team. Let me ask you the easiest question out of everything is, what do you do outside of medicine for hobbies and passions in life? I know you don't get too much free time being the director of a comprehensive stroke center, but do you have any hobbies or passions in life you can let us know about?
Sure. I mean, right now, my biggest hobby is my family. I have a 5-year-old daughter. I have a 2-year-old son. My son was born at Palmetto General Hospital. So right now, whatever time I have left, I try to spend as much time as possible with them. But beyond that, of course, I love sports as well. So a lot of those things. But like you said, right now, in the beginning, when you start something new, it's going to take time. My third child, baby, if you will, has been this comprehensive program, the stroke program at Palmetto. And essentially, again, it needs the same kind of nurturing, the same kind of care. And you just have to devote time, and then you slowly start seeing this growth of the program, and the program getting better and better. So, right now, yes, my main focus is the stroke care. But as time goes by, hopefully, I'll find some more hobbies once my kids also grow up a little bit more.
That's great, Dr. Ghoshal, and I can't thank you enough. Great story, amazing job you're doing, and just so happy that you took the time to join us tonight. That's Dr. Ritesh Ghoshal, mdnineuro.com. Dr. Ghoshal, thank you so much.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. Thanks a lot.
Hi, my name is Dr. Rahul Agarwal. I'm an interventional cardiologist in Jupiter, Florida. I did my medical school at the University of Florida and my internship and residency at the same program. I did my chief residency also at Shands, and then did my cardiology and interventional cardiology at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I specialize in general cardiology, interventional cardiology, and nuclear cardiology. Even though I'm an interventional cardiologist, the majority of my practice involves general cardiology. General cardiology is a pretty broad spectrum in that it involves rhythm problems such as atrial fibrillation, heart disease such as coronary artery disease, congenital heart disease, high blood pressure, and cholesterol problems. I do procedures such as cardioversions, which involve trying to convert the patient back to a normal rhythm if they have an arrhythmia. also deal with plumbing problems such as the coronary arteries, which if they're blocked, I can do angioplasty and stents, which involves balloons that open up the arteries. And these stents act as scaffolds that keep these arteries open. I really do believe in preventive medicine, and one of the areas that I really focus on is diet. One can really get caught up on the pills aspect and the exercise. And diet we talk about a lot, but unless one really has some guidance as to where to go with diet, it can be quite difficult. So I do give my patients homework in terms of books or movies that they can rent or obtain so that they can get educated. Our cardiology office is located in the Abacoa area of Jupiter, Florida, conveniently located between two of the local hospitals. We provide echocardiography, stress testing, ultra monitoring, and general cardiology office visits. We really pride our practice in its staff, who are very courteous and professional. We believe that under our care, you'll feel the same way too.
You are listening to Doctors Are People Too with David DiPino, who shows us the human side of medical doctors in the community. If you have a question for our guest, call into the show at 888-565-1470. Now, let's get back to the fun side of doctors and show that they are people too.
And we're back on Doctors Are People Too. Hello, South Florida and beyond. And I'm so lucky to have in the studio a veteran, experienced dermatologist to share some adventures in health with us. That's Dr. Brent Schillinger from Dermatology Associates of the Palm Beaches. Dr. Schillinger, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for coming aboard on Doctors Are People Too.
Sure.
Now, I have a lot of, we were talking in the lobby, I have a lot of questions about dermatology, but you said something interesting in our initial conversation that there's three main types. I was asking about melanoma. There's three main types of melanoma, and I just thought of melanoma as just, it's melanoma, you know, I'm the average guy.
Actually, we can make a big deal out of it. There's three main types of skin cancer.
Of skin cancer.
Okay.
I think I butchered that.
And melanoma is one of the three, but there's about 5 types of melanoma if you really want to get into that, but that could be for another show.
Yeah. But what are the three main types of skin cancer?
The three main types, the most common one is basal cell carcinoma, which is a overgrowth of the bottom layer of the epidermis, the base layer of the epidermis. And that one makes up, I don't know, maybe 50% of the skin cancers we see, maybe more, usually caused by the sun. Squamous cell carcinoma is the next most common one, although depends who you ask. I think these days maybe the pathologists are diagnosing more. We're finding them earlier, but there's a heck of a lot of squamous cell carcinomas. In the old days, back in like the 80s and the 70s, you used to think squamous cell was much worse than basal cell, but I think these days we're catching them so early that some of the squamous cells are maybe even less serious than the basal cell. But those are the two most common ones because the melanoma is by far the most serious. And luckily, it's the least common, but we're seeing more of them all the time. Statistically, they've done a lot of demographics here.
Mm-hmm.
And back in 1930, I think it was like 1 out of a couple of hundred, 1 of every 200 or 300 people would get melanoma in their lifetime. And it's projected that now, by like the year 2025, 1 out of 40 people, 1 out of 30 people in the United States is going to have a melanoma. So that's a lot of melanoma.
It's gone up tremendously.
Yes.
Is that, I know there's a lot of different reasons, but is that because our ozone layer is depleting, it's getting hotter? Is there any correlation to that? I mean,
there's some good questions you got there.
we could go a whole hour on that.
I think there's a multitude of reasons why we're seeing more of a lot of these things, including the melanoma. First of all, we're diagnosing more because we're looking for them. And we're catching a lot of things earlier. So I think that's part of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is starting in the 1970s, 1980s, a lot more people moved into the sunny parts of the country, like South Florida, into what we call the Sun Belt. So there were a lot more people getting a lot more sun exposure. And there's an incubation period from the time you get the sun exposure to the time cancer would appear, which could be 10, 15, 20, 25 years. So we're seeing the effects of that now. And so more exposure, looking for more of them, catching them earlier. There's an awareness, so people come in. Physicians now know to look for these things, whereas maybe 25, 35 years ago, it wasn't a lot of these things just weren't even detected.
Hmm.
Ozone may be a possibility. That's controversial.
It is right
It's
now.
like global warming, global cooling, all this stuff. It's like it probably all exists to some extent. But we used to hear, I think back in the 80s and the 90s, it's because the ozone layer has thinned out. We've been using too many aerosol cans. Remember, we used to have all
I
the
remember those.
hairsprays and the deodorants. And those came off the market. And then somebody did some studies, and they go, actually, maybe the ozone layer isn't depleted, but we have more ozone than we used to have. So it's possible. I won't rule it out completely, but it's one of the possible factors.
Now, can melanoma only be caused by the sun, or can it also be caused by external lights or even tanning beds or anything?
Another great question. In fact, 50% of the melanomas are strictly genetic. They're oftentimes in areas that have never even seen the sun. So there's two categories. The other half are either sun-related or, as you alluded to, tanning bed-related. There's some theory, people who work in offices with certain types of fluorescent lights, perhaps even it stimulates melanoma. But the two different categories. But here's an interesting perspective on that. There's some groups that came out a few years ago that said, hey, we've been using more sunscreen over the last 20 to 25 years. At the same time, we're seeing more melanoma, so we think sunscreen is causing melanoma.
Oh, wow.
Which a lot of us in the profession said, wait a minute, that's like a little twisted. And if you went back and you looked at the data, I think the way we can interpret that is the sunscreen has given many people a false sense of security. So people who normally wouldn't spend that much time outdoors spent the whole afternoon outside. They go, I got the sunblock on, I'm not burning. So probably in a certain way, it was promoting the melanoma because it was giving some people a false sense of security. The take-home message there is keep using the sunscreen, but you should be doing other things besides sunscreen in terms of sun protection.
Because sweat and water can wash it away. That's why it's important to reapply a lot.
Absolutely. And I think also because none of the sunscreens are perfect. Even if you're not sweating and you're not washing it off, there's nothing better than staying inside all the time. But we live in Florida. People decide to live here because they like the weather and they like the sunshine. So it's impractical to say never go out in the sun. And probably to some extent, it's good for you. So I think a moderate approach is what one needs to take. And besides using sunblock, avoid the worst hours, which is 10 to 2, 10 to 3. Have a very long lunch and go out either early in the morning or late in the afternoon. And the clothing is huge, protective clothing. We're talking about big hat, not just a baseball cap that covers the top of your nose. You need something that protects you, keeps your whole head in the shade. Those are very important. And there's tremendous selection of lightweight long sleeve and long pants out there these days that are very stylish and made of these extremely lightweight synthetic materials. Columbia Sportswear is one of the companies. Used to be able to get that at Sports Authority. I don't think they're around anymore. But
no, unfortunately not.
You
but
got Dick's Sporting Goods.
Yeah,
You got
that's a good one.
Amazon.com. And these are fantastic fabrics for people who are going to be spending lengthy amounts of time outdoors.
We see a lot of the fishermen are wearing those. They seem to get it. They have those awesome long sleeve that are kind of breathe, that actually have sunblock in them. Have you seen those?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's the same type of material, the same company. So I highly encourage it. I have a
Same
whole
company,
bunch of
you're
them
right.
in my closet because I just like to wear them when I'm doing something outdoors. They're great.
So you heard it here first, and doctors are people too. Dr. Schillinger, get your Columbia Sportswear. They're going to love that. No, that's good. No, it's good to know. Coming from a doctor, we take a little bit more seriously, I think, the reapply, wearing the correct, headwear, and then also long sleeve shirts, even in the summertime, if it's really bright out. I mean,
in fact, with that type of fabric, this very lightweight polyester
it's
mixes.
nice, yeah.
I think it's actually more comfortable than cotton because it's so light and it breathes. And who would have thought? 20 years ago, they had articles written about, you should get this tightly woven nylon. You're thinking nylon's going to itch and scratch and everything. They're phenomenal fabrics. I really encourage that.
I do own a few of them. They were a little expensive when they came out, but I think the prices came down a little bit, so everyone should invest. You said something that's very interesting here, and I want to dig deep a little deeper. Melanoma, 50% is genetic, and if we take that all the way down to the famous Bob Marley, who we all think he died of cancer from something else. Not all of us, but that's the first thing we think of. But actually, he had a form of, is it melanoma
Yes.
under his toenail?
Yeah, he had, you asked about different types of melanoma before. He had something called acral lentiginous melanoma. It was right under the toenail. He thought it was from a soccer injury, from kicking the ball too hard or something like that. And we talk about one of the biggest problems with skin cancer is the knowledge about prevention and the fact that it can occur in people even with very dark skin.
He's obviously a black man. I know his father was Caucasian white, but his mother's obviously a black woman, and but his skin was darker, and he was able to develop melanoma, and through genetically, and it popped up under his toenail, and like you said exactly, he had played a lot of soccer with shoes off, like they do, like kids do, and young adults do too, when we get time to go to the park and run around. And he had thought he had broke his toe from kicking the ball too hard, like you said. And I think as the story goes, he was obviously didn't think that this could be any other kind of injury. And I think they wanted to amputate his toe at one time, and he denied it maybe for other reasons. And because of that, the melanoma actually spread from a little spot all the way into the internal organs of the body. Is that how it works?
Exactly. That's how the melanoma gets you.
Wow, it spreads through the bloodstream. It can start as little as a dot under the nail and then just spread.
Gets in the blood, gets in the lymph.
Uh-huh.
It can literally spread throughout the whole body.
Wow, unbelievable. And a lot of people don't know that. And until we talked briefly before, I think I'd heard it one other time, but I didn't take it seriously. I thought maybe he got, cancer from smoking too much marijuana or, doing other things like we'd think. But it's been proven. I mean, dermatologists have studied this case many times. This is a proven fact.
Oh, yeah, Bob Marley is the poster boy for people with dark skin can definitely have skin cancer.
That's unbelievable. And now, if someone driving around listening to the show or sees it on YouTube or amp2.tv and they notice a spot under a nail, should they go find a dermatologist, go to their primary care, and then that's referred to a dermatologist, or should you always have maybe a dermatologist you're seeing a couple times a year?
I think what's important, whether it's by the nail or anywhere else on the skin, something that suddenly appears is not necessarily a problem. But something that appears that looks a little weird, that wasn't there before, and persists for a month or two, these type of things need to be investigated. Or something you've had for a long time that suddenly changes. It gets larger, changes color, starts bleeding, becomes painful. These type of changes, if basically I use the description, if it looks weird, probably something you need to check out. And I'm a little biased, and I think, it's probably a good idea to see a dermatologist if you have something like that going on.
Dr. Schillinger, hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break, and on the other side, we're going to talk about the shape of weird things on your skin and why you should see a dermatologist on Doctors Are People Too.
My dad is a cardiologist, and so I have two brothers, and we were all equally painful to my mom. And so to get us out of the hospital, we would go on rounds with him on Saturdays and Sundays in the hospital back in Oklahoma City. And we used to, race wheelchairs down the hallways from the time I was about 6 years old. When I was a freshman in high school, I got to watch my first heart transplant. But I think what really kind of made me want to be a doctor was around the holidays. The house always filled up with tons of gifts from thankful patients, and to impact people's lives like that in a positive manner was something that was very exciting to me. I'm very patient-oriented. I care about the patients both professionally and personally, and not only about their result, but also that I'm passionate about new technologies. I'm passionate about research. I'm passionate about offering them the best technology available with the lowest risk and with the best outcome. What you want in a physician is someone who is personable, works as a team, embraces new technology, is clearly accomplished, but I think most importantly is somebody who you get confidence in, and the way I would have confidence is if I had a condition, I would read as much about it as I could before I showed up, probably off the internet, and then ask very directed questions. I do a lot of exercise. Running is what I use to kind of calm my brain down and kind of sort my thoughts out. So I enjoy, I just will put my shoes on and go for a run, and then I do mix in a little bit of yoga, something probably not many people know about me. I keep that on the down low, but so I do some yoga, and I go to the gym like most people.
You are listening to Doctors Are People Too with David DiPino, who shows us the human side of medical doctors in the community. If you have a question for our guest, call into the show at 888-565-1470. Now, let's get back to the fun side of doctors and show that they are people too.
Water coolers? Oh, okay. And we're back on Doctors Are People Too. We're talking about our neighbors to the east, the Bahamas, which is, awesome. I'm from Jupiter, doctor, originally native.
Okay.
So Freeport's right across my inlet. But I live in Boynton now, but we're going to get a little more into that. We were talking about Bob Marley, and we were talking about, if anything looks weird or the shape of things. I don't think we got into shape. We got into color a little bit, but if you have a weird shape growing on your body, it's probably a good idea to see a dermatologist.
Yeah, again, I reiterate, if you've had it for 20 years, no matter how weird it looks, if it's not changing at all, it's probably actually not a problem. But things that are evolving, things that either were never there that suddenly are there, or things that have been there for a long time that are changing, bleeding spontaneously, getting bigger, irregular edges, uncomfortable, weird. I just like to throw out that word. In your brain, you're in the shower, you go, that looks kind of weird down my arm. If you see something like that and it persists for more than 3-4 weeks, you probably should get it checked out, because prevention is the key. And if you haven't prevented it and it's grown already, the next most important thing is early detection. Because any of this stuff, particularly on the skin, if it's a problem, if you can catch it early, the prognosis is so much better than not taking care of it.
Wow, that's great to hear, and we have to listen to that, because that works with anything. I mean, early prevention, if a doctor can get to it early, they have a much better chance of...
And the beauty with the skin is you can see it. If you have cancer growing in your stomach, God forbid, you're not going to know until there's some serious symptoms. The skin, you're in the shower, you see it right away.
Are we seeing the color and shape changes? Is that cellular changes going on? Is that why it's growing, or
well,
the color's
if we're talking about cancer per se,
cancer.
Generally speaking, whether it's skin or breast or stomach, it has to do with an uncontrolled growth of something. And clinically, to the naked eye, one would see this enlargement or this bleeding or this changing. Microscopically, you will see an increase in uncontrolled type of growth.
Uncontrollable growth. That's a great point.
As opposed to psoriasis, which you mentioned during the break.
Yeah, I want to talk about psoriasis.
Psoriasis is a disease where you also have uncontrolled growth, but it's not a cancerous growth. Psoriasis is a situation where the cells on the skin and your epidermis turn over. They go from that basal layer, which produces basal cells, but not psoriasis, from that lower layer to the epidermis to the top, and then they shed. Normally, it takes about 28 days. In psoriasis, it's about 4 to 7 days. So it goes much, much faster. And for some reason, you get these funny-looking things called psoriasis.
And normally those are found in the arms, is that correct, or legs?
The most common area that helps us make a diagnosis of psoriasis is to be on the elbows and the knees.
Oh, okay.
Oftentimes in the scalp, and some people, the entire body.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've heard of it in the scalp as well. So, is that like a red blotchiness? If you see that, you should probably see a dermatologist?
The term that's used is micaceous scales.
Okay.
If you remember back to Earth Science, did you take Earth Science?
Oh, yeah,
junior
definitely.
high school? I think
I
I
enjoyed
did.
it.
It was a long time, but mica, right? You could
Mica,
peel
yeah.
off those mica. It was like this very thin, scaly things you could peel off the rocks. And that actually is just what psoriasis looks like, these thin, pasted, scaly things with a red base underneath. The reason you should seek treatment is because there's a lot of really good treatments out there. It's not going to kill you, but it can make your life really, really uncomfortable if you don't treat this condition. And in the last 10, 15 years, the industry has developed some products called biologics. Now, they're ridiculously expensive. Insurance usually pays for the whole thing. And that's a whole nother show. We could talk about how crazy the pricing is.
I'm definitely having you on again.
That's a
You're
whole nother
very-
show. But for somebody who's suffering from moderate to severe psoriasis, this category of medication can totally clear you. Something we couldn't do 25 years ago.
Unbelievable. That's great to hear, Dr. Schillinger. Let's go back. We talked about Jamaica and Bob Marley. Let's talk a little bit more about our friends the Bahamas. And you're doing a study ongoing in the Bahamas with a very famous musician.
Actually, what we're doing, something like that. I've been involved in a lot of international volunteer mission work, going to particularly developing nations, some people call third world nations, where the medical care is not up to par. And I've been to Peru and Colombia and to Cuba and to Nicaragua, among other places. Now, Bahamas came up on the list because my wife is from Bimini. And we made a trip there a couple years ago when I first met her and determined, they do need some extra help there. So we've been kind of dealing with the Bahamian government, which is a slow process. And we've tried to get permission to do some things there, and it's been a lot of bureaucracy. But I found out about a dentist out of New York who has set up a dental clinic where he goes back every so often, and one of his patients is Lenny Kravitz, the famous rock star. And Lenny has a foundation. The guy in New York, Dr. Levine, has a foundation. We have a foundation called the Yama Bahama Foundation. So we're kind of combining all of our efforts, and we're going to be going over to Eleuthera on the weekend of October 20th to help those people with dental, with dermatology. We do some other health screenings there.
That's great. And it's Yama, like the letter Y?
Yama Bahama.
Yama Bahama Foundation.
Exactly.
That's great, Dr. Schillinger. And
that's named after my wife's late father, who was a famous boxer in the 50s and 60s. So you can look him up in Wikipedia.
I'm going to do that.
He had the, I believe, longest consecutive Friday night fight wins at Madison Square Garden back in the late 50s, early 60s in the middleweight category.
Wow.
So we're doing this in
really
his honor and his memory.
What a great way to celebrate his legacy with knocking out, different ailments that, affect people on a daily basis. Because let's be frank here. I mean, quality of life is most important. And if we have access to great doctors like yourself, I mean, it can really, really change our well-being. I mean, that's important.
That's what we're here for.
That's great. And I had read on the website, and I was going to get to that about your mission work, but you said Peru, and then did I read Jamaica on there? Have you been down to Jamaica?
We did one in Jamaica once.
Nicaragua, very important.
And we're going to be doing something with the students from the Nova Medical School in India. I've never been there before, but we're going to go to India this December.
Wow.
So that should be really interesting.
Really neat. And you mentioned Nova Southeastern University. You teach there?
I'm affiliated as a clinical assistant professor in dermatology, and I've gone on a number of missions that they have set up. And I also put together a residency program up in West Palm Beach at the JFK North Hospital.
Okay, there in Atlantis. Oh no, the new one in West Palm Beach.
Yeah, it used to be West Palm Hospital.
Yeah,
used to be something else. That's the only hospital in Palm Beach County that's had 14 different.
Is that
names.
right off 45th Street off 95? Okay, I know where that is.
So about 15 years ago, I was involved in setting up a residency program there for training residents in dermatology, and our primary affiliation there is with Nova as well.
Let's stay on the hospitals. Where are you on staff at?
Well, dermatology, we don't do a lot in the hospital. Okay, so I used to be on every staff, but now I'm on staff at the Delray Medical Center, and the one that they call JFK North.
Okay. And you take a lot of the major insurances? I think that's important for patients.
We do.
Okay. And let me ask you, well, I'm going to give out your info. We have a couple more minutes here with Dr. Brent Schillinger. The phone number is 561-707-7065. His office at Dermatology Associates of the Palm Beaches.
Let me give you a better number.
Okay, let's do a better one.
561-278-1362.
Okay, once again, Dr. Schillinger's office is 561-278-1362. 1362. And easy website here, greatderms.com. And that people can find out. That's where I was reading your info. We only have a couple minutes, so I know you do a lot of mission work, but do you have any, and you're married, and you have any hobbies and passions that we don't know about? Like I play 7 guitars. A lot of people don't know that.
Wow, seven,
Not at the same time.
Well, I like to go to the gym almost
Okay,
every
yeah,
day. So
you're
I
fit.
think that's an
That's
important
great
thing. Spending time with the whole family, with my kids, with my wife's kids. And my wife, she has like 10 brothers and sisters, and they all have kids and grandchildren. So every time we get together, it's like 120 people in the room.
That's great.
Traveling.
Nice.
Traveling and medical ethics. That's a whole another area which, if you have a couple hours, we could talk about.
Yeah, I definitely want to have you on again because we didn't even touch on a couple of things I wanted to touch on, and is sebaceous cysts and Plantar's warts, because I've had both. I tend to grow things, so I may be coming your way. You take Cigna? I mean,
Absolutely.
Let me know. I'm coming to you. I don't actually have a dermatologist, and like you said, you don't really find them too much in the hospitals unless they're called in. But we could see Dr. Schillinger at his office, Dermatology Associates of the Palm Beaches. Where is that? The corner of?
It's Federal Highway in Delray Beach by Lindell. Across from where there's the Walmart Family Supermarket, whatever.
I know exactly where that is. Yeah, Lindell and Federal Highway in Delray Beach, 561-278-1362. Dr. Schillinger, thank you so much for coming on Doctors Are People Too.
Glad to be here. Pleasure.
Thank you for listening and watching Doctors Are People Too with David DiPino. Join us next week for more in-depth views on what doctors are all about and how they spend their free time. All shows can be seen on amp2.tv. And if you have questions you want answered on the air, call 866-224-5422 and leave a message that can be read on the air. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
Talk 14